Ben Eunson here. Today I'm going to talk about and play some Bach on guitar. Now, I'm not necessarily known for performing classical music, but I do love to play Bach pieces for myself to explore the beautiful arpeggios, scales, and melodies that are abundant in this music. Today I'll be playing for you the double or variation on the first movement of Partita No. 1 in B minor from Sonatas and Partitas for the Violin by Bach. We'll be taking 10 examples from this piece and analyzing how we can apply Bach to contemporary harmony in my latest guitar masterclass, Improvising with J.S. Bach, only available at bensguitarclub.com, featuring detailed examples of how you can apply Bach's voice leading principles to your soloing language on guitar, complete with instructional videos, theoretical explanations, as well as tab and notation. And while you're at it, make sure to hit subscribe down below and click the bell so you don't miss any of my future videos. Outside of many performances by brilliant violinists in history, the book Sonatas and Partitas for the Violin turns out to be somewhat popular amongst, of all people, guitarists. It has over the years become an invaluable resource for sight reading practice for guitarists. In fact, that's actually how I came to know about this work in the first place. But beyond mere sight reading practice, I have gone on to learn many of these pieces for my own personal enjoyment and study. You just heard me playing the double or variation on the first movement of Partita No. 1 in B minor, and it contains arpeggios, scales, and melodic development that are really not far off the kind of material that you hear in linear improvisation, which is typically what I'm interested in playing on the guitar. So what I'd like to do is analyze some of the materials that are being used throughout, scales and arpeggios namely, and listen to some of the harmony that is being spelled out by these materials, in particular 5/1 cadences. We can take fragments occurring over 5/1 cadences and potentially apply them to our own improvisational language as soloists on guitar. So let's get into it. Let's see if we can use any of this material for our own purposes, for improvising. Our first example occurs in bar 1. It could be said that in this example, the harmony that is being implied sounds a lot like an F-sharp 7 with a flat 9, something like this. So that's our 5 chord heading back to a minor 1, which is B minor. F-sharp 7, B minor. Throw in some chromatic passing notes, and you've got an improvised line. Our second example occurs in bar 2. Now this one is really interesting because it sounds a lot like a minor 2-5-1 heading toward B minor. C sharp half diminished, F sharp 7, and B minor. And you can hear it in action right from the beginning. Those notes are all the notes in a C sharp half diminished arpeggio, followed by all the notes in an F sharp 7 arpeggio, B minor. Beautiful. This is again the kind of material where you could almost just throw in some chromatic passing notes and you'd have something that sounds a lot like an improvised line. Something like that. You can learn all of this and a lot more in my latest guitar masterclass, Improvising with J.S. Bach, only available at bensguitarclub.com, featuring detailed examples of how you can apply Bach's voice leading principles to your soloing language on guitar, complete with instructional videos, theoretical explanations, as well as tab and notation. I find this stuff absolutely fascinating, not only for its inherent compositional beauty, but for the fact that I could take any one of these fragments that we've looked at today and use them in my own improvisational lines. I'd encourage you to do the same thing. Always keep an open mind and never be afraid to experiment. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.